and welcome back to Code Corner with Dan Decker, the podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Hickman, the engineering manager for Midwest Alarm Services. In our last podcast, we covered all the specifics of Chapter 4 of the International Building Code. Today, we're picking up where we left off, taking a look at a few other important chapters with our Industry Affairs Manager, Dan Decker. Dan, where are we heading today?
Thanks, Nicole. It's good to be back. We're going to look at everything but Chapter 9 today, Chapter 9 being the fire protection chapter. While Chapters 5 through 8 don't have as many specific fire alarm requirements as we do in Chapter 4, they're still incredibly important for us to understand. We'll cover some tidbits that you need to know from each of these chapters and even touch on a few key takeaways from Chapter 10 before we dive into the big one, Chapter 9, in our next episode. Looking at Chapter 5, that chapter covers general building heights and areas. The key section here for us is mixed use and occupancy. A building can have different occupancies, and if there's no firewall separating them, it's a non-separated occupancy. Sounds like something that an architect would have to worry about, not a fire alarm contractor.
But what does that mean for us in fire alarm?
Well, this is where it gets interesting, and it's a good rule to know. While the code applies to each portion of the building based on its occupancy, when you've got a non-separated occupancy, you're going to have, and you've got multiple occupancies that, I guess that's probably a better way to put it, rather than a non-separated occupancy, is to say that we've got multiple occupancies in the same building and they're not separated from each other, because that's really what it means. And so if you have a occupancy with fire alarm requirements go into part of the building, they now apply to the entire building if it's a non-separated occupancy. We had a project a few years ago where it was just started out as a sprinkler monitoring system, not a big deal. And then they decided to add on to the building and have a tenant suite for a restaurant. And our designer is actually the one that caught it. And Matt asked me, he says, don't we have to do a fire alarm for the entire building if we just do the restaurant? I said, well, isn't the restaurant got a 2-hour barrier around it? So we would just do that. It would be its own building. And he said, well, there isn't. And so we sent an RFI into the architect and said, it looks like with the restaurant being part of a non-separated occupancy, we would have to put the fire alarm requirements for the restaurant would have to extend to the entire building. And the architect said, well, he said, we talked about that, but the owner didn't want to put in a firewall, but let's look at it from that angle and we'll get back with you. So they called back a few days later and said, you're right. We would need to extend not only the fire alarm, but sprinklers would have to be extended through the entire building. And for just a fraction of that cost, they can separate that with a 2-hour firewall, separate the restaurant from the rest of the facility, and then limit where the occupancy requirements for the restaurant were. They're now limited to the restaurant, not to the entire building.
That's a perfect example of why this knowledge is so important. What about the other chapters?
Kind of the same thing. There's a few tidbits here and there that can reach out to bite you if you're not aware of them. Chapter 6 is about construction materials. Chapter 7 covers passive fire protection, which is things like just a fire-rated wall, door closers and fire-rated walls, dampers and fire-rated walls. Chapter 8 deals with interior finishes and their fire performance requirements. These chapters don't directly address fire alarm systems, but they do set the stage for fire safety.
And then we get to Chapter 9.
That's the biggie. Chapter 9 is where we'll be spending a lot of time in the next episode. It's titled Fire Protection and Life Safety Systems, and it covers everything from automatic sprinkler systems, portable fire extinguishers, clean agent fire suppression systems, to fire alarm and detection systems, smoke control, emergency alarms, and a new one that's really being expanded a lot is carbon monoxide detection and alarms. So that's really the core of what we do is Chapter 9. A lot of people want to pick up the book and say, well, let's see what's in Chapter 9. But these supporting chapters can certainly have an impact on things too.
Well, I can't wait to learn about Chapter 9. But before we wrap up today, I know you had a couple of important tips from Chapter 10, the means of egress. What should
Yeah,
we know?
yeah, that's basically, it doesn't sound like anything that's too concerned with alarms. It's means of egress or stairways and corridors, but there are some things that can reach out and bite you. Chapter 10 talks about intrusions into the exit path. And if you've got an object that's between 27 and 80 inches above the floor, which can include both pull stations and wall mounted notification appliances, the rule is that they can't project more than 4 inches horizontally into the corridor. So if you put a speaker strobe, deep to start with, and you put it on an extension box, you may find that that device is within the 80 inches off the floor and it is sticking more than 4 inches into the corridor. So that can be a code citation. I've even seen pull stations that were, for whatever reason, sticking out more than 4 inches from the wall, and that gets cited because it becomes an obstruction to the exit path.
Yeah, that seems like a detail people might overlook. What else should we know about?
Since we're in the electronics business, section 1009 of chapter 10 covers accessible means of egress. That includes areas of refuge. Areas of refuge need a two-way communication system to a central control point like a fire command center. Sometimes they have to call off site. So those are systems that our industry installs. It's good to know when they're required because sometimes somebody might miss it. It's better to catch it before we submit plans rather than be an urgent matter when they're trying to get occupancy.
We do access control too. Does that play a part in this?
It can. Generally, in the old days, access control was to allow you into the building. Didn't typically restrict your exiting from the building. But now with turnstiles and gates and mag locks, access control systems can restrict the free access from the building or free exiting from the building. So if you've got an access control system that is restricting your ability to get out, any activation of the fire alarm system or the sprinkler system must automatically unlock the exit doors to allow people to get out. So even though a fire alarm system doesn't include access control, if there's access control in the building, we need to provide an interface to that, usually an addressable relay, so that it can allow people to exit when the alarm is activated. As I always say, it's rude to tell people to evacuate through the fire alarm without unlocking the doors first.
That's a great point and a vital safety feature. Any last tidbits before we finish up for the day?
There is one. Um, I was started as an installer in the business, and I was trained that you can never use your interior stairways as a path for running your fire alarm circuits between floors. Sometimes you get floors that don't know what the architect was thinking, but you don't have rooms that stack up one above each other from floor to floor. So it makes it hard if you've got to run, say, a fire alarm circuit from the first floor to the fifth floor. You're dodging all over the place trying to find a room where you can penetrate and get up to the next floor and not be coming up in the middle of a conference room or something. And so stairways always seemed like a logical place to do that. They connect all the floors, they're all in one spot. You can stick a raceway up the wall and you've got all your wiring taken care of. That was not permitted under both the BOCA building code and, geez, the first 5 or 6 editions of the International Building Code. Section 1023 was where the restriction was, and it does prohibit penetrating interior exit stairways except for several specific items, which were exempted. Item 2 of that list of items was always except for sprinkler piping. I understand you've got sprinkler risers that go in stairways, so it makes sense they're going to penetrate the floor. When the 2018 edition of the code was released, that language that said sprinkler piping was changed to fire protection systems. And that sounds like, well, we just cleaned up the language a little bit and made it sound prettier. In reality, the term fire protection system is a defined term in the building code. In Chapter 2, it's defined as approved devices, equipment, and systems, or combination of systems that are used to detect a fire, activate an alarm, extinguish or control a fire, control or manage smoke and products of a fire, or any combination thereof. And at the same time, there was an exception for security systems was made as well. So the code has actually changed. It wasn't a minor thing. It was kind of a big deal for those of us in the industry. And a lot of us that have been around for a while just automatically know that you can't run wire in stairwells for your fire alarm system when that's how we were raised. That's how it was forever. And yet for the last couple of code cycles, that's been changed in the code and we can now do that. So that's a big plus for us that we can do a fire alarm riser in the stairways now, and that can be a real help in those buildings that don't have stacked risers or telecom rooms that provide an easy path.
This has been a fantastic overview of these key sections of the building code. It really highlights how interconnected all of these chapters are. Thank you for your time and expertise.
Thanks, Nicole.
And thank you for listening to Code Corner with Dan Decker. Join us next time as we dive into the all-important Chapter 9, the Fire Protection and Life Safety Systems chapter. We'll see you then.